had just sent my sister $10,500, the final deposit for the boutique launch she'd been dreaming about for months. The confirmation screen was still glowing on my laptop when my phone buzzed. Her message was simple, almost casual. Tomorrow's VIP launch dinner is just for the creative team and family. Maybe sit this one out. I remember staring at the screen, trying to do the math in my head. How do you pay for the party and still not be invited to it? And more importantly, what would you do next? The text message came through at 11:51 p.m. 3 minutes earlier, I had authorized a wire transfer for $10,500. The final venue deposit for the boutique studio launch my sister Morgan had been planning for 8 months. My laptop screen was still open on the confirmation page, that little green notification telling me the transfer had gone through successfully. I remember leaning back in my chair, feeling that strange mix of exhaustion and pride. Not pride for something I had built exactly. More like the quiet satisfaction of watching someone you love step into a dream you helped make possible. Then my phone lit up. It was Morgan. I expected a thank you, maybe a quick voice note full of nervous excitement about the big night tomorrow. Instead, the message read, "Hey, just a heads up. Tomorrow's VIP launch dinner is for the creative team and family only. So, maybe sit this one out. We'll send pics." I read it once. Then again, not because I didn't understand the words. The sentence was painfully clear, but my brain kept trying to rearrange them into something that made sense. Family only. Creative team only. I was both, wasn't I? Or at least I thought I was. Before I could even type a response, just a question mark, honestly, another notification popped up. Our family group chat. My mother Susan had reacted to Morgan's message with a heart emoji. No comment, no clarification, just a small red heart floating under the text that told me to stay home. Something strange happened in that moment. I expected my chest to tighten or my eyes to burn the way they usually did when something hurt. But instead, this cold clarity settled over me. They weren't asking me to skip dinner. They were informing me that I had never actually been part of it. I wasn't the creative team. I wasn't even really family in the way that counted in that room. I was the funding source, the bank that allowed the creative team to exist. And the more I sat there staring at the screen, the more the patterns started lining up in my head. The rebranding package last spring, $3,000, because Morgan said her vision deserves something better than a template. The imported Italian espresso machine, $5,000, because she swore it would be the heart of the business. The rent deposit, the legal fees, the inventory orders. Every time she had a problem, I solved it. Every time the dream got expensive, I stepped in. For years, I told myself that's what supportive sisters did. But if I'm being honest, there was another reason too. Somewhere along the way, I learned that my seat at the family table wasn't guaranteed. It was rented. My value wasn't just being there. My value was being useful. If I was helping, paying, fixing something, then I belonged. If I stopped, the lights went out. And tonight's message made something painfully clear. I had just paid the premium, and somehow my subscription had still been canceled. I stared at the glowing transfer confirmation on my laptop, then back at the text message telling me to stay home. For a long moment, I didn't type anything. I didn't argue. I didn't explain how much that money meant, because something inside me had already shifted. If they thought I was just the bank, then maybe it was time to start acting like one. I didn't reply to Morgan's message. Instead, I looked back at my laptop screen. The confirmation for the $10,500 wire transfer was still. sitting there, glowing in the dark like a receipt for something I suddenly didn't recognize. My hands felt strangely steady, not angry, not shaking, just precise. The first tab I opened was the catering company's vendor portal. The login was muscle memory at this point. I had created the account months earlier, chosen the menu myself, negotiated the price per plate when Morgan said the original quote was too high. The dashboard loaded. Event VIP launch dinner. Date confirmed. Guest count locked. I clicked Manage Booking. The cursor hovered for a moment over the options. Then I selected Cancel Service. A small window popped up asking for the reason. I didn't type a paragraph. I didn't tell a story. I simply selected the option from the drop-down menu. Funding withdrawn. The system processed the request in seconds. Contract status voided. One click. Just like that, the champagne glasses and plated dinners for their investors disappeared. I sat back for a moment, listening to the quiet hum of my apartment. The refrigerator in the kitchen, the faint buzz of my laptop fan. Then I opened another tab. This one led to the state's business licensing portal. This part was different. The catering cancellation was inconvenient. Embarrassing, maybe. But this was structural. Morgan's credit history had always been a mess. Late payments, overdraft fees, credit cards constantly hovering at their limits. The only reason she had secured the commercial lease for the boutique and the business license that went with it was because I had signed as the guarantor. My name was the steel beam holding up her entire glass building. Without it, the structure didn't stand. I navigated to the documents section and found the active license application. My name sat there on the guarantor line, quietly supporting everything. For a second, I thought about all the other numbers that had led here. The $3,000 rebranding package she insisted would elevate the brand. The $5,000 Italian espresso machine she called the heart of the business. The rent deposit, the legal filings, the inventory orders. Piece by piece, dollar by dollar, I had built the safety net under her dream. And now I was looking at the knot that tied me to it. I clicked Revoke Guarantor Status. A warning message appeared on the screen. Revoking this guarantee will immediately suspend the business license and void the commercial lease agreement. Do you wish to proceed? For a moment, the room felt very still. 2 years of work, 2 years of financial support, 2 years of telling myself I was just being a good sister, a silent partner, someone who believed in family. All of it balanced on a single confirmation button. I clicked it. The page refreshed. A confirmation email arrived in my inbox at 12:03 a.m. It had taken exactly 12 minutes to dismantle what had taken me 2 years to build. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, letting the quiet settle around me again. The strange thing was, I didn't feel panic. I felt something closer to relief, because the invisible chain that had tethered me to them for 29 years hadn't snapped. I had simply unlocked it. The sun wasn't fully up when my phone started vibrating across the nightstand. For a moment, I just listened to it half awake, the low buzzing sound rattling against the wood. I had slept maybe 4 hours, but it was the deepest sleep I'd had in months. No dreams, no anxious thoughts looping through my head, just silence. When the phone finally stopped, I reached over and checked the time. 7:15 a.m. The catering company's office opened at 7. I unlocked my phone. 17 missed calls from Morgan, 5 from my mother, and the family group chat looked like a war zone. The first message was from Morgan, sent about 20 minutes earlier. Megan, pick up the phone. The caterer just called me. They said the contract was voided due to client request. What is going on? Another message immediately below it. This isn't funny. They're saying they won't deliver unless the payment is made again in full. Call me. Then another, and the venue just emailed. Something about the guarantor being removed. Megan, what did you do? I scrolled further. Her messages got shorter, faster, more frantic. Finally, there was a voice note from my mother, Susan. I sat up in bed, pulling the sheets around my waist, and pressed play. I expected confusion, maybe concern. Instead, her voice exploded through the speaker. Megan, I don't know what kind of petty jealous game you're playing, but you need to fix this right now. Your sister is hysterical. She's been crying for an hour. You're ruining her big day because you didn't get an invite. Grow up. Transfer the money back immediately. Jealous. Petty. I stared at the phone screen for a long moment. Strangely, the words didn't sting. If anything, they felt like confirmation. Because when you stop feeding a parasite, it doesn't apologize for living off you. It panics. It lashes out. It calls you selfish for cutting off the supply. Their anger wasn't really about the dinner. It wasn't about hurt feelings. It was panic. The sudden realization that the host organism had finally detached. I slid out of bed and walked into the kitchen. The apartment was quiet. Peacefully quiet. I filled the kettle, turned on the stove, and started making coffee. Behind me, my phone buzzed again on the counter. Another message from Morgan. I glanced down at the screen. You're overreacting. Mom didn't mean it like that when she hearted the message. And the creative team thing was just about the seating chart. A pause. Then another message. We were going to celebrate with you next week. Just a small dinner. Please, Megan, the investors are coming tonight. If there's no food, we're going to look like amateurs. Don't do this to me. Next week. I leaned against the counter while the coffee brewed. Next week I was worth celebrating. In private. Away from the investors. Away from the cameras and the champagne and the big speeches. Tonight, though? Tonight, I was apparently too inconvenient to sit at the table. The coffee finished brewing with a soft click. I poured myself a mug and took a slow sip. It tasted better than usual. Not sweeter, just clearer. The phone buzzed again. Morgan, calling this time. I watched the screen light up and let it ring until it stopped. Then I opened the group chat. The message box blinked at the bottom of the screen, waiting. For the first time since all this started, I typed. Not an explanation, not a defense, just a single sentence. The investment has been withdrawn. The guarantor's signature has been revoked. I paused for a second, then added one more line. I suggest you contact the investors you mentioned. Perhaps they can cover the catering. Then I hit send. 3 dots immediately appeared as Morgan started typing. My mother's name popped up too. I didn't wait to read what they wrote. I tapped the group settings and left the chat. The screen went quiet. No more messages stacking up. No more notifications. Just the soft morning light filtering through my kitchen window and the warmth of the coffee cup in my hands. Somewhere across the city, Morgan was probably standing in the middle of her boutique space, surrounded by decorations, empty tables, and a growing sense of dread. Because without the catering, there was no dinner. Without the guarantor, there was no venue. And without my money, the creative team wasn't launching anything. They were just a group of people standing in an empty room, wondering how everything had fallen apart overnight. After I left the group chat, the apartment fell completely quiet again. No buzzing notifications, no angry voice notes stacking up. Just the steady morning light coming through the window and the half-finished mug of coffee warming my hands. For a few minutes, I simply stood there. Then I realized something. Stopping the money was only the first step. It stopped the bleeding, but it didn't recover anything I had already lost. So I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop again. A blank document appeared on the screen. At the top, I typed a title that felt strangely formal. Formal demand for repayment. If I was no longer playing the role of supportive sister, then I needed to start acting like something else, an auditor. I opened my bank history and started scrolling back through the last 2 years. At first, the numbers looked like random transactions, wire transfers, equipment purchases, vendor deposits. But the longer I looked, the more they began forming a pattern. The rebranding package Morgan insisted would elevate the brand. $3,000, the espresso machine she called the heart of the shop. $5,000, marketing deposits, inventory orders, website development. Some of those I had accepted as gifts at the time. I knew I wouldn't see that money again. But others were different. Loans, advances, temporary support until the boutique started making money. At least, that's what Morgan had promised. I started listing them one by one. Date, amount, description. And next to each entry, the repayment terms she had casually mentioned in conversations I had been foolish enough to trust. The list kept growing. My mouse clicked steadily as I worked, almost mechanically. No emotion, no hesitation, just numbers. When I finally reached the bottom of the document, I added the total, $8,400. That was separate from the $10,500 venue deposit I had just canceled. $8,400 in loans that had quietly turned into permanent donations. At least in their minds. I stared at the number for a moment. Then I opened my email. Morgan's address went in the recipient line. My parents' addresses went into CC. If this was going to happen, it was going to happen. In the open. I attached the spreadsheet of transactions along with screenshots of the receipts. Then I began typing. The tone of the email was deliberate, cold, professional, completely stripped of emotion. No accusations, no personal commentary, just facts. Attached is a record of financial contributions provided over the past 2 years, which were designated as loans or temporary support for the boutique startup. Another line. The total outstanding balance is $8,400, separate from the venue deposit that has already been canceled. Then the final paragraph. Please provide a proposed repayment plan within 30 days. If no agreement is reached within that time frame, I will pursue legal avenues to recover the outstanding balance. I read the email twice. Then I pressed send. For a moment, nothing happened. Then my phone buzzed on the desk. A voicemail notification. My father, Richard. I hesitated before pressing play. My father was rarely the loud one in the family. He usually stayed quiet while my mother handled the shouting. But when he did get angry, it came out differently. Slower, heavier. His voice filled the room. Megan, you listen to me. There was a pause, like he was holding something back. You fix this. You call those vendors back and you fix this right now. Another breath. You're going to destroy this family over your ego. Do you hear me? You're going to destroy us. The message ended. I stared at the phone for a long moment, replaying that last sentence in my head. You're going to destroy this family. Not you hurt your sister. Not we're disappointed. Destroy. I replayed the voicemail. My father's voice filled the room again. Slower this time because I was actually listening to the words instead of the anger. You're going to destroy this family over your ego. You're going to destroy us. Destroy. That word stuck with me. I set my phone down on the desk and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Something about it didn't make sense. If all I had done was cancel catering and pull my guarantor status, the launch dinner would be a disaster, sure. Embarrassing. Expensive. But destroy the family, that felt disproportionate. It was just a party, just a dinner, unless it wasn't. I sat forward again and opened my laptop. My inbox was still open from sending the repayment email. I started scrolling through older messages connected to the boutique project. Vendor confirmations, equipment invoices, marketing proposals. Then something caught my eye. An email thread from a few weeks earlier. Morgan had accidentally left me copied on it. At the time, I barely skimmed it because it looked like legal paperwork. Something between her and a lawyer about the company structure. Back then I trusted her. I assumed it was just routine paperwork for the launch. Now I clicked it open. The thread was longer than I remembered. Messages bouncing between Morgan and a business attorney, discussing timelines, documentation, and something labeled updated operating agreement. My eyes moved slowly down the page. Buried halfway through the thread was an attachment. Draft revised ownership structure. I opened it. The document loaded line by line a standard legal format with paragraphs outlining the company's structure, voting rights, and profit distribution. Most of it looked like the typical language you'd expect in a small business operating agreement. Then I saw the line labeled Agenda VIP Launch Dinner. My stomach tightened. The dinner wasn't just a celebration. It was scheduled as a formal event. There it was in plain language. 8 p.m. Formal induction of co-owner. I blinked at the screen. Co-owner. For a moment my brain filled in the obvious assumption. I thought maybe this was the surprise Morgan had hinted at weeks earlier. Maybe she had finally decided to make my involvement official. After 2 years of funding equipment deposits and marketing, maybe the dinner was meant to introduce me publicly as the silent partner. It would explain the investors being there. It would explain the ceremony. My chest tightened slightly as I scrolled down to the section listing ownership percentages. The names appeared in bold. First, Morgan, majority owner. Then directly underneath, Kyle, Morgan's fiance. Next to his name was a number that made my fingers go cold on the keyboard. 40% equity stake. I stared at it for a long time, convinced I must have misread something. I scrolled up again, then down. Morgan, Kyle, 40%. My name wasn't anywhere on the page. The room felt suddenly very quiet. I kept reading. The document explained the terms of the equity transfer. Kyle would be formally introduced as co-owner during the launch dinner with his ownership finalized. Once the capital contribution was received and the amended paperwork filed with the state licensing board. Capital contribution. The phrase sat there on the page like a blinking warning light. Then the timeline clicked into place in my head. The VIP dinner tonight, the investors watching, the ceremonial announcement, and the $10,500 wire transfer I had sent just hours before. Morgan told me to stay home. My stomach dropped. The money I sent yesterday wasn't just paying for catering. It was the capital contribution, the buy-in. My $10,000 was being used to purchase Kyle's 40% share of the company. For a moment, I actually laughed under my breath, but there was no humor in it. I hadn't just funded the party. I had funded the announcement, the celebration of my own replacement. Suddenly, my father's voicemail made perfect sense. He wasn't worried about a ruined dinner. He was terrified that without my money, the entire plan would collapse. No capital contribution meant no equity transfer. No equity transfer meant Kyle couldn't become co-owner. And without that shiny narrative, the perfect fiancé stepping into the business as a partner, the whole carefully staged launch would fall apart in front of the investors. They weren't just using me, they were liquidating me. My role had always been temporary, a bridge loan, A silent guarantor until someone they actually wanted in the company could take my place. And the final piece of the puzzle had been sitting in my bank account all along. I leaned back in my chair again, staring at the document glowing on my screen. For 2 years I thought I was building something with them, but the truth was simpler. I had been paying for the moment they could finally push me out of the room. For a few seconds I just sat there staring at the screen. Morgan and Kyle, 40% equity. My $10,500 paying for the celebration. It was already bad enough. But something about the document still bothered me. One line near the bottom kept pulling my eyes back. It mentioned that the amended ownership structure would be filed with the state once the guarantor consent and equity waiver were processed. Guarantor consent, that meant me. If Morgan was transferring ownership to Kyle and restructuring the company, the guarantor would have to approve it. My name was still attached to the lease, the license, the entire legal structure of the business. They couldn't just change that without my permission, at least not legally. I opened a new tab and logged back into the state business licensing portal, the same site I had used in the middle of the night to revoke my guarantor status. The dashboard loaded slowly. Business name, license status, application history. I clicked on the document history tab. For a moment, nothing stood out. Just a list of filings and uploads over the past few months. Routine paperwork for permits and registration updates. Then I saw it. 3 days earlier, document upload waiver of equity and transfer of guarantor rights. My stomach tightened. I clicked view PDF. The file opened, loading slowly, page by page. Legal language filled the screen paragraphs, explaining that the undersigned guarantor acknowledged the restructuring of ownership and consented to transferring equity participation to the incoming partner. I kept scrolling. Page 2, page 3, then page 4 appeared. At the bottom was a signature line. My eyes froze on it because the name written there was mine. The signature was perfect. The loop in the M, the slight upward curve at the end of the N. Even the spacing between letters looked exactly like the way I signed checks. For a second, I wondered if maybe I had signed something weeks earlier and simply forgotten. The boutique paperwork had been endless leases, vendor agreements, financing documents. But then my eyes moved to the date printed next to the signature, August 14th. I didn't need to think about it. On August 14th, I wasn't even in the state. I had been in Chicago, 3 days at a conference. I remembered the hotel ballroom, the networking dinners, the long presentations that made my back ache from sitting too long. There was no way I had been sitting in a room with Morgan and a notary, signing away my rights to the company. I leaned closer to the screen. The signature looked real, too real, which meant it wasn't a sloppy forgery. It wasn't someone scribbling my name quickly on a line. It had been copied, carefully traced or digitally lifted from another document. Probably the original lease agreement I had signed months earlier. The air left my lungs in a slow rush. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. It wasn't just family dynamics or emotional betrayal. This was fraud, felony fraud. Suddenly, my mother's heart emoji on Morgan's exclusion message made a sick kind of sense. They weren't worried about inviting me because in their minds, they had already extracted everything they needed. My money, my credit, my signature. Why invite the person when you already have the paperwork? I stared at the document again and a cold realization slid into place. If I hadn't revoked my guarantor status in the middle of the night, if I had waited even one more day, this document would have been processed. The ownership structure would have changed. Kyle would legally hold 40% of the company. My $10,500 would have quietly turned into his buy-in capital, and I would have been locked out of the business I funded with nothing but a forged signature to prove I ever had a role in it. The thought sent a rush of adrenaline through my chest. Not panic, clarity. I downloaded the PDF. Then, I downloaded the file metadata showing the upload date, time, and the IP address used to submit it to the state portal. Next, I opened my travel folder and pulled up my flight confirmations from August. Boarding passes, hotel receipts, conference registration. Proof that on the date listed next to that signature, I had been hundreds of miles away. I took screenshots of everything. The forged signature, the upload record, the travel itinerary. One by one, I placed the files into a new folder on my desktop. I labeled it simply, Evidence. When the folder was finished, I leaned back in my chair again and looked at it for a long moment. A few hours earlier, this had been a messy family argument about money and respect. Now it was something else entirely. This wasn't a fight between sisters. It was a crime. I reached for my phone. For a moment, I thought about calling a lawyer. But then I opened the keypad and dialed the non-emergency police line instead. Because if they were willing to forge my signature to steal my investment, they had already crossed a line that couldn't be walked back. Once the folder was finished, I sat there for a while, staring at the screen. The word evidence looked strange on my desktop. Too formal. Too heavy for something that just a day earlier had been wrapped up in family group chats and casual promises about the future. But there it was. Inside the folder sat the forged waiver document, the metadata from the licensing portal, and the flight confirmations proving I had been in Chicago the day that signature supposedly appeared. 3 pieces of information that told the same story. Someone had forged my name. And not for something small, not for a harmless shortcut. They had done it to transfer equity in a business I funded. To replace me, I opened the PDF one more time. The signature stared back at me from the bottom of page 4, smooth, confident, familiar. For a second, I tried to imagine Morgan sitting at a desk somewhere, copying it. Maybe tracing it slowly from an older document. Maybe convincing herself it was just paperwork, just a technicality, just something that needed to happen for the launch to go smoothly. But the longer I looked at it, the clearer the truth became. This wasn't an accident. It was a plan. The VIP dinner. The investors. Kyle stepping forward as a new co-owner with 40% equity. My money quietly paying for the buy-in that made it all possible. Everything had been arranged. Everything except one detail. Me finding out before the paperwork went through. If I had waited one more day to revoke my guarantor status, this document would have been processed by the state. The ownership structure would have changed. Kyle would legally own nearly half the company, and my $10,000 would have been gone transformed into his stake, while I sat at home, uninvited to the dinner where they toasted their new partnership. I closed the PDF. The realization settled into my chest with a strange calmness. This wasn't just toxic family behavior anymore. It wasn't manipulation. It wasn't emotional betrayal. It was identity theft, forgery, actual crimes. And suddenly the next step felt obvious. I picked up my phone and searched for the number of the local police department. Not the emergency line. This wasn't flashing lights or sirens. Just the non-emergency reporting line. My thumb hovered over the call button for a moment, because once I pressed it, there was no coming back from that. Family fights can sometimes be patched over with apologies. Time softens things. People pretend nothing happened. But you don't accidentally report someone for felony fraud. That kind of line once crossed stays crossed. I thought about my father's voicemail again. You're going to destroy this family. At the time, the words sounded like a threat. Now they felt like a confession. Because if telling the truth destroyed something, then maybe it had already been broken. I pressed call. The phone rang twice before someone answered. Non-emergency line. How can I help you today? For a moment, I listened to the quiet professionalism in the operator's voice, the normalcy of it. Then I said calmly, I'd like to file a report for identity theft and document forgery. She asked for some basic information first. My name, my address, the nature of the situation. I explained that I had discovered a signed waiver submitted to the state licensing board, transferring business equity and guarantor rights. A document carrying my signature, a signature I had never written. The operator paused. Do you know who might have submitted the document? The question hung in the air for a second. I knew the answer before she finished asking it, but saying it out loud felt like sealing something permanent. Yes, I said finally. My sister and her fiancé. The words sounded strange coming from my own mouth. Not dramatic, not emotional, just factual. The operator began typing on the other end of the line, asking for dates, the business name, the location of the filing. I described the document, the signature, and the travel records, proving I had been out of state. Each detail felt like placing another brick in a wall that was already rising between me and the life I used to have. When the report was finished, she gave me a case number, said an investigator would likely contact me once the documentation was reviewed. I thanked her and ended the call. The room fell quiet again. Outside, somewhere across the city, Morgan was probably still trying to salvage the launch dinner, calling vendors, calling investors, pretending everything was under control. But the structure she had built the entire event around the equity transfer, Kyle's buy-in, the paperwork waiting to be processed, it was already cracking. Because the moment that police report existed, the document they forged wasn't just paperwork anymore. It was evidence. And once the licensing board saw it, once investigators started asking questions, the launch wouldn't just be postponed. The entire business was about to collapse under the weight of its own lies. 48 hours passed before the silence finally broke. Not with another phone call, not with another angry voicemail, with a knock. It came late in the afternoon, 3 slow, uneven taps against my apartment door. I had been sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open when I heard it. For a moment, I just stared at the door. I already knew who it was. I walked over and looked through the peephole. My mother stood in the hallway, but she didn't look the way I remembered her from the voice messages 2 days earlier. There was no anger on her face now, no tight jaw or raised voice. She looked smaller. Her hair was messy, like she had been running her hands through it all day. Her eyes were red, the skin underneath them swollen and tired, like someone who had just watched their house burn down. I opened the door, but I didn't step back. I stayed in the doorway, blocking it. "Megan," she said, her voice cracking the second she saw me. "Please, we're losing everything." She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. "Morgan, she's not okay. The investors are gone. The venue canceled the date." "Kyle," she stopped for a second like the word hurt. Kyle left, her eyes filled with tears. "They're talking about suing us for the lease break fee. We don't have that kind of money." She took a small step forward, reaching out like she wanted to touch my arm, but stopped when she saw my expression. "Please," she whispered, "just call the licensing board. Tell them it was a mistake. Reinstate the guarantee. We can fix this." Her voice dropped even lower. "She's your sister." For a moment, I just looked at her. This woman who had hearted the text telling me not to come. This woman who had listened to Morgan accused me of jealousy and called me petty for cutting off the money. "I can't do that," I said quietly. Her face crumpled, while she sobbed. "Do you hate us that much? Is this about the dinner? We'll throw you a dinner. We'll do whatever you want." I shook my head slowly. "It's not about the dinner, Mom." I reached over to the small table near the door, where I had left the folder earlier. Inside were the documents I'd printed that morning. I pulled out a single sheet, the photocopy of the waiver document, and handed it to her. "It's about this." She took the paper automatically, confusion still clouding her face as her eyes scanned the page. Then she saw the signature, my signature, and then the date next to it. I watched the exact moment the realization hit her. The color drained from her face. Her hands started to tremble slightly as she looked back up at me. "Megan, Morgan said she talked to you. She said you agreed." "Don't," I said gently, cutting her off. "I filed a police report this morning." The words hung in the air between us. Her head snapped up. "You called the police on your sister." I met her eyes. "I called the police on the people who stole my identity." A long silence filled the hallway. "That just happens to include my sister." She stared at me like she didn't recognize the person standing in front of her anymore. "But she could go to jail," she whispered. "I know," I said. And for the first time since this started, I felt absolutely certain of something. "I saved myself, Mom." I gently took the paper back from her shaking hands. "And now you need to leave." She stood there for a moment longer, tears running down her face. Then I closed the door, turned the deadbolt, and chose myself. The weeks after that weren't loud or dramatic. They were quiet. Not the heavy kind of silence that comes from being abandoned, but the kind that settles in after a storm has finally passed. The boutique never launched. Once the business license was flagged and the paperwork around the ownership transfer came under scrutiny, everything started unraveling. The venue released the launch date to another client. The investors, already nervous about the sudden cancellations and rumors of legal trouble, quietly pulled out. Without the launch, there was no capital. Without the capital, there was no new ownership structure. And without the promise of a clean, debt-free company to step into, Kyle walked. 2 months later, he ended the engagement. It turns out his commitment to Morgan had been tied pretty closely to that 40% stake he thought he was getting. My parents tried reaching out a few times in the beginning, angry voicemails. Emails filled with guilt and accusations about how I had ruined Morgan's life. I didn't listen to most of them. I archived them without opening. For the first time in years, I didn't feel responsible for fixing the chaos they created. Life settled into something much simpler. One Tuesday evening, about 6 months later, I was sitting on my balcony with a glass of wine. The air was cool, the city humming quietly below. My apartment was clean. My bank account was finally growing again, no longer drained by emergency loans or last-minute family investments. My laptop sat open on the small table in front of me. On the screen was an old spreadsheet. The file name read, Family Projects. I had created it years earlier as a way to keep track of all the financial help I was giving them. At the time, I told myself it was just for organization. But looking at it now, it felt like something else. A ledger of love, car payments I covered when someone fell behind, rent money that was supposed to be temporary, birthday gifts that were really bailouts. 5 years of transactions stacked neatly in rows and columns. At the bottom of the sheet was the final total. A number big enough for a down payment on a house, big enough to pay for a wedding, big enough to build a life that had nothing to do with trying to prove my worth to people who only noticed me when they needed something. I hovered the cursor over the file for a long moment, and for a second, I imagined the version of my life that almost happened. I pictured myself sitting at that VIP launch dinner, tucked into a corner table while Morgan and Kyle stood under soft lighting, toasting their future as business partners. I could see myself smiling politely, clapping along with the investors, pretending not to notice that the business I funded now belonged to someone else. 10 years passing like that. Still the silent partner, still the guarantor, still waiting for a thank you that never came while they leveraged my credit for the next big idea. The image made my quiet apartment feel like a sanctuary. The silence wasn't lonely. It was expensive. It was the luxury I had finally bought for myself. I took another sip of wine. Then I looked back at the spreadsheet, moved the cursor, and hit delete. The file disappeared, just like that. Down on the street, people were walking dogs, laughing, heading to dinners they were actually invited to. For the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need an invitation anymore. Sometimes the hardest lesson isn't learning who people are. It's accepting who they've been showing you all along. I spent years trying to buy love with loyalty money and silence. But real family doesn't send invoices for belonging. If you've ever felt like the ATM in someone else's life, maybe this story hits close to home. And if it does, share it with someone who needs the reminder and stick around if stories like this speak to you.